Okay, folks, it's 12:30, time to get this show going. Good afternoon, welcome to the Glendale City Council Workshop Session of January 26, 2021. This meeting is called to order. Do we have a Councilmember Aldama on the telephone right now? He's not on the phone? Okay, when he gets on the phone, let us know so we can mark his attendance. We will do attendance roll call. We're going to start with Councilmember Aldama is not on the phone. Councilmember Clark.
Here.
Councilmember Melner. Councilmember Tomachoff.
Here.
Councilmember Turner. Vice Mayor Hugh.
Here.
And I'm present. So with that, we'll move right along. Ms. Barber, can you introduce item number 1 for us, please? Thank you.
Council item of special interest, small cell and 5G technology follow-up.
Good afternoon, Mayor, members of the council. Here to provide the staff report on this will be Don Bessler, our Chief Capital Improvement Officer, and he'll be assisted with Ryan Lee, our Intergovernmental Program Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Phelps. Mayor Wires, members of council, we are here today to bring back an item, a council item of special interest that you first heard about at your September 22nd, 2020 workshop. At that workshop, there was consensus for us to continue to tease out elements of this issue and then come back to the council. That's why we're here today. Staff met with the council working group, which involved Councilmember Malnar, Councilmember Tomachoff, and Councilmember Aldama. In that effort, we developed a scope of work that was approved by that group and the city manager. And then we also have provided a council report and that approved scope of work in the packet as background information. Just wanted to give you a little bit of a visual. During the September 22nd workshop, there was a lot of question and a lot of interest in what was really happening in the marketplace with this type of technology, specifically in Glendale. And so we've put this visual in the packet today just as some background information. As of today, there are 302 small G towers that are deployed within the city limits of Glendale, and there are another 84 that are currently permitted for installation. We understand, as we mentioned at the September 22nd workshop, and the council members have certainly expressed that this is really a bellwether issue for how we manage our right-of-way. It touches on quality of life, it touches on economic development, and it touches on local control issues on how we have local governance into our future. Today, we're going to just go through the scoping statement with you and ask for your concurrence and your direction on how we might move forward. I'm going to turn it over in a moment to Ryan Lee. In that scoping statement, we talk about the goals of what we would try to accomplish, the deliverables, the timeline under which this could occur, and the administration, which is essentially just the staff effort that would be involved to continue to advance this issue. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ryan.
Thank you, Don. Mayor and council, let's now walk through the goals that staff is proposing today. And as Mr. Bessler noted, we are seeking your feedback, and ultimately we wish to receive consensus from the council to ensure that we're properly focused on the concerns of our residents and the direction from the council. So the first goal from staff is to increase public awareness. This goal is the greatest opportunity to address the health and safety concerns of our residents. We've discussed before that the market is driving many of the decisions on where to deploy wireless infrastructure. And without the public health expertise, it's important that we bring the community and our service providers together to address their concerns and reduce any worries that may exist. And so we're hoping to, through many collaborative efforts, both with staff and some plans we'll discuss later today, we hope to improve and increase the public awareness. The next goal is to formalize our policy agenda on this issue. And so as we do each year, and as we did back in December last month, we brought forth our legislative agenda. And in that legislative agenda, we focus on a few key issues that give us the greatest flexibility to be able to address individual items like this. And so in our legislative agenda, we have land use planning, and this fits in really well with our agenda. And so we will continue to make this a priority from the council. The next goal is to engage our federal agencies to provide the most current public health information. As we've discussed in the September 22nd workshop, there's a lot of discussion taking place around the country regarding the FCC's involvement in wireless deployment and in the lack of standards and study regarding health and safety. If you travel all across the country, you're going to hear states sharing the same concerns we do. And so our goal is to use our relationships through the U.S. Conference of Mayors and the National League of Cities, and also our federal delegation to engage with the FCC and see if we can get some FCC staff available so that as we receive concerns and as we try to work through issues from our residents and from the council, we have the experts there available for us so that we can be a resource. The next goal is to work collaboratively with the region and the state to strengthen our control, our local control, and we want to be able to continue the dialogue that we need to be able to monitor and understand better the impacts of small cell. And so we're committed to continue working with the West Valley first and seeing if there are mutual interests, and then we can expand from there. And as we go through the deliverables later on, we'll talk about how we would engage with our counterparts. So the next slide is going to be the deliverables, and this is how we would accomplish or address our goals. And so the first item is drafting a letter for our congressional delegation. As I mentioned earlier, that as part of this process, Intergovernmental Programs and Engineering will draft a letter to the FCC requesting that a member of their staff be available to the city as a resource for residents to express any questions or concerns about these emerging technologies. The next deliverable is to engage with the West Valley and determine their level of support for this. Obviously, if we can get a greater number of cities who have similar concerns, we'll be able to have a stronger message.
Mayor, I'm going to cover the next two bullets, and I would just say this Facebook Live event, I really liked the way Brent Stoddard said it back last fall when we were meeting, trying to engage our residents remotely because of the pandemic, and we tried a Facebook Live event, and I don't remember the exact number, but I want to say that we had about 1,500 comments that were streaming through that hour-and-a-half period that we were presenting the bond election information. And the quote that I remember, Brent, is we want to meet our residents where they are. And so we want to continue to move this issue forward in a timely manner. So we're thinking that a Facebook Live event would be a great way to do that. We see it as being interactive where residents can call in or email in or chat in to ask questions. We see a panel of experts. Hopefully we have somebody from the FCC that can address the public health and safety questions that continue to proliferate. We are looking at inviting experts from the industry that do business in Glendale, some of the various utilities, and have a panel that's moderated so that we can both provide information and then answer questions for people that are trying to engage and ask questions. So we see that happening. It's one of the deliverables that we would propose. If it's successful, we certainly could repeat that as well. And then we want to continue to provide transparency and information on the permits and the projects that the city approves. We had one of the things that came out of the small G issue this past fall was the development of a web link on the engineering website so residents can go in and see more about 5G technology, see where permits have been issued, and see the type of aesthetic that they might be experiencing if a 5G permit is issued in their neighborhood. So we would want to continue to create that level of transparency for our residents and keep it organic and interactive way for us to communicate. I'm going to turn it back over to Ryan to talk about the timeline and what action we would request.
Great. Thank you, Don. And so we're here today on January 26th to present this council item of special interest to the council. So we are seeking your consensus as we move forward. We are shooting for March 21st to host a Facebook Live event. And as I've spoken to several of our service providers, there has been interest, as I've teased this a little bit, for their involvement. So they understand that there's work to do. As I spoke to one of our providers earlier today, the statement was that the technology has moved forward, but the pandemic has slowed down the communication. And so there is an understanding and a recognition even amongst our providers that we need to remain focused on communicating with our residents. So we're looking to host a Facebook Live event in March, and then this spring we'll begin engaging with our West Valley cities first and then expand through other cities to determine what their level of concern is regarding this matter. And so our request before you today is to approve the goals that we've brought before you and the deliverables, and to authorize the city manager to proceed and assist with this working group.
Questions? Go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. A couple of questions. On the page that shows the current cells, are those all 5G capable today, or are those a range of different type of cell towers?
Excuse me, Mayor, Councilmember Malnar, I'm just looking to my expert in the audience, but I want to say yes, those are small cells that may have to be retrofitted for 5G, but they were put up originally as a small cell tower. That's accurate, yes.
Just to follow up to that, given that, is there a permit process for converting to a 5G, or can they just simply take a 4G and convert it to 5G?
I'm going to say that yes, they have to go back to us and talk about the permitting. Mark, is that accurate? They have to re-permit?
If you would, sir, why don't you come to the microphone?
Normal process would be for them to go ahead and either notify us and work on the existing permit that they have to where they're just doing an upgrade. It's not a visual upgrade. It would just be a matter of updating their data service to that antenna.
All right, thank you. If I may, Mayor, I support this very much, and I know we are limited in our authority at the city level at this time, but I think this is a good step to at least formalize some things for the public to be more aware of what's going on. I'm particularly interested in item 2 on the goals, engage federal agencies to provide most current public health information. I think that's one thing that is lacking, seriously lacking. We need to provide that. Again, if we're putting these in, we need to assure our citizens that they're safe. And we were told at our last meeting in September that there's just not a lot of information out there. But I'd like us to engage in with the federal agencies to really push on that to make sure that we can communicate the safety of these devices. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Is this microphone working? I guess it is. Okay. Unfortunately, in addition to what Councilmember Melner said, the FCC's ruled on microwaves and other issues, but they have not ruled on 5G. They've really avoided really addressing the issue, safety issue, period. So hopefully maybe there'll be a change with the change in leadership and a change in philosophy there with the FCC, hopefully. I do want to ask, though, do we have, or are we able to determine how much more infrastructure is going to be needed in Glendale in order to actually deliver 5G?
Mayor, council member, I'm not sure we're able to exactly answer that, but I would say that Glendale has a significant amount of fiber on the fiber side to support 5G, and as you can see from this map, there is a proliferation of antenna, but as you also know, this is market-driven, so all of those don't represent necessarily one carrier. And so I couldn't give you a hard answer on that, but that's something we can certainly look into. But I think you're going to continue to see the market drive speed and economy of scale, and you're going to continue to see this sort of a quest for these installations.
Mayor, if I could continue. So it's my understanding, though, that because 5G is so much more powerful, that it requires more towers or small sites in order to deliver a signal. You can't have things as far apart as you could for 3G or 4G. Is that true?
Mayor, council member, I'm going to say generally that's correct. To try to connect the distance, close that gap in the distance is one of the things that makes the technology at any G work better. I'm not expert enough to say that 5G requires a shorter spacing. I haven't heard that, but we can look into that to get you an
Okay.
answer.
All right, thank you, Mayor. And I have a couple of other things. Do we, I don't think we do, provide some sort of, or are we able to require the contractors like we do with MacPro on transportation projects to notify residents? I don't know if we're even allowed to do that. I know that the legislature and cities came to some sort of an agreement several years ago that really cost the cities $220 per site a year on leases. I don't know exactly what was, negotiated back and forth, what the result of that was. I don't know. One of the biggest things that I hear from residents is, where did that come from? It's just, dropped into their neighborhood with literally no notification. And so I don't even know if we're able to do that, but have some sort of a MacPro, where they put door hangers and tell people, hey, this is gonna happen, over here.
Mayor, Councilmember Tomachoff, thank you for that. That was one of the big wins that we actually got out of this issue last fall when we were working it. Councilmember Aldama brought up the fact that there was a very poor effort of neighborhood notification in one of his neighborhoods in his district. It caused us to really peel back the onion on what we actually require. And it's what you think. Some of the carriers and providers are very good about it and more sophisticated, and some are less. And then when they subcontract out their work, it becomes even more distance from that good interaction that you want between the city, the service provider, and the resident. And so we do have the ability to do that. I believe we have a 10-day waiting period that notification has to be put out from when we approve the permit. They have to have the door hangers out in the work site. I think it's 300 feet of where the work's occurring, and they have to then wait 10 days so that we are able, and they are able, has both of our contact information for residents to ask questions should they have any.
Okay. Mayor, one more if I could. I know some of it did happen. I know you're well aware of the issue at Station 156 with the obsolete pole being replaced by, I realized there was no permit because it's an existing lease, but I imagine that sort of thing is going to be happening at other locations around the city where the pole is obsolete or it's not capable, it doesn't have enough capability, whether for the signal or even for the carrier to lease off and generate revenue with that site. So I don't know exactly whether, even if there's not, maybe there is a permit required, but I mean, and I know we did approve that. I know we had to approve because it was higher. So there still is an approval process if it's in a different spot or larger or something like that. There still is an approval process. The issue with the Station 156 is that it was on a city site, so there was no neighborhood process. So I would like to at least consider, because there's possibility this is going to happen on other city sites, that we follow the same notification process that we would on a privately owned site.
Mayor, council member, I think we learned some lessons about how that project emerged through several different city departments. And we understand that erring on the side of transparency and inclusion is always the best course of action for us. So we will continue to work with our new development services director to make sure that between the engineering department and his department, that there's a really clear line of sight between how permits are issued. It gets a little bifurcated and a little odd, but it doesn't mean that we can't do better, and we will do that.
Okay, thank you. That's it for me, Mayor.
Mr. Turner?
Thank you, Mayor. Actually, I was going to raise the same point that Councilmember Tomachoff just raised about the notification. So I'll pass on that one. I'm satisfied with what I've heard. Then my other question would be about the aesthetics of these facilities. I've seen a variety of different pole styles and that sort of thing. Some hardly notice a difference at all. Others have, big bulbs and other things on the top. What can we expect, or what can our residents expect as this goes out? Are we going to try to standardize pole styles or anything, or is it going to be the Wild West?
Mayor, Councilmember Turner, thank you for the question. We can address the aesthetic to some extent, but mostly as it relates to setback, heights, and line of sight issues that cause public health and safety. The industry has proprietary solutions to their antennas. These are basically antennas. And so they have the flexibility and the ability to be able to do really what they want within those broad parameters that I just described. I think what you are going to see, and I think if you recall back to the September 22nd workshop, you're going to see the industry respond to the fact, and I'll give you an example of that in just a second, but they're going to respond to the fact that they are being challenged with their impact, their visual impact for the quality of life in neighborhoods, not just the potential public health effects, but the visual impacts. Mr. Gibson, who just came up to the microphone a moment ago, and myself and Ryan hosted what was the first and what will be a quarterly meeting with our dry utility providers. We sent out invitations to all of the people that do business in the valley, and particularly Glendale, ranging from Southwest Gas to Crown Castle. We had about, I believe, 11 different companies were represented. We really got a sense from those folks that they want to do the best they can to partner, and they understand that our issue is always going to be about transparency, fairness, inclusion, sensible, those sorts of things. So I think you're going to see the industry respond. You're starting to see more monopoles and less of all the peripheral stuff that goes on it. And I would just say the last part I want to say about that is that everything's fine unless it affects you. So when the closer something is to somebody, the more discreet we become about, or discerning we become about its visual. But I think you're going to see the industry, and the industry has tried to embrace that to some extent.
Mayor, if I could just follow up. And to that point, at the rate these are proliferating, everybody's going to have one near them, it seems like. And I would like the city to be in a position of, on the resident side, on the side of our neighborhoods, about the design and the appearance of these poles and their location next to street lights and things like that. We shouldn't leave it just to the individual resident or even a homeowners association to have to fight a communication company over this sort of thing. So if we can take a more neighborhood positive stance on this, I would appreciate it. And also on the notification, the other thing I was going to bring up is that it's important not just to notify the immediate residents, but if they're within an HOA, that the HOAs and the association would get notice too, because I'm sure they get a lot of phone calls when these things start popping up in neighborhoods. Thank you.
Park.
Thank you. I have two questions that are for follow-up or clarification. One has to do with the idea of notification to the city. And I believe Mr. Gibson said that when they upgrade a site, they notify us, but they don't have to go through a permit process. So my first question has to do with when they upgrade to 5G or upgrade for whatever reason, can the city, does the city have the ability to require a permit so that we know for sure what is occurring where within the city? That would be my first question.
Mayor, Councilmember Clark, I think it's on our list of things that we need to look into and follow up. I can't give you an answer today.
Okay, and I think time is of the essence, because while we're sitting around talking about it, more 5Gs are coming into the city, and Rather than being reactive, I'd like to see us be a little bit more proactive. My second issue has to do with spacing, and not in terms of 2 5G poles, but spacing with regard to a 5G pole and existing homes. Can the city, for example, we did it with group homes, but in that case, we required them to be X amount of feet apart from one another. But does the city have the ability to institute spacing requirements that a 5G pole must be, I'm just going to be hypothetical, 300 feet or 500 feet away from a home? Do we have that ability to require that kind of infrastructure placing?
Mayor, Councilmember Clark, I'm going to say, in the way you described it, probably we don't have that flexibility. The industry has access to the public utility easement and the right-of-way, and whatever regulations we put in place have got to be considered reasonable and customary. So if we will always look to try to do this with the least impact to the neighbors, I don't know that we have the authority to say in that instance, the way you described it, that we can create minimum setbacks unless it creates a known public health and safety or line of sight issue or something like that, that would be the larger overriding issue. But again, that's probably going to require a little bit of legal research. That's my fast answer.
Well, that's my concern. We have basically no information on the public health safety implications of 5G. And if we must rely upon there being an issue of public health or safety as a mitigator to allow us to space, it would seem to me that another very urgent issue becomes the ability to gather as much information as possible on the public health issue with regard to 5G. And there may be some recommendations out there that do state that for the public health, they should be X feet away from a residential neighborhood or an existing home. So I would hope that those seem to be two major issues that need to be addressed sooner rather than later. Thank you.
Okay, with that said, we have consensus for Mr. Lay to get what he's asking for.
Yes.
There you go. Ms. Bauer, can you introduce item 2?
Presentation regarding adding city code to regulate the display of holiday decorations.
Mayor, members of the council, here to provide staff report is Deputy City Manager Rick St. John.
Mayor, members of the council, I think I created the PowerPoint out of order. So if it's okay with the council, can we tackle item number 3 first and then move to item number 2? And that's my mistake.
Okay.
Question, item 3 is holiday decorations?
I thought item 2 was just read as holiday decorations.
Yes.
So,
That's
Vice
the
Mayor,
item we're going to take up now.
Vice Mayor, Councilmember Clark, I'd like to do the landscaping and whatever's attached with landscaping first, and then holiday lights last, if that's okay.
Presentation regarding city codes for landscaping and palm tree regulations.
That's fine.
Thank you, sir. So the presentation that I'm giving today is after much conversation with the Code Review Committee. These are recommendations from the Code Review Committee on several different items today. And what we're talking about really has to do with the health and public safety issues more than it does the aesthetics. And so with that in mind, I'd like to walk us through a couple of conversations, one that we've had several times already, and one of our favorite topics is palm trees. And so, as you know, we have a current ordinance that's not enforceable. We've known that it's not we're not able to enforce it properly through the courts. Since we lost the case back in 2017, we did bring some proposed language back in 2017, and we've had a couple of workshops over the last year or so talking about palm trees. This conversation was had in the Code Review Committee, and the focus was on the public health and safety issues surrounding palm trees. And so the 10-foot separation, which is consistent with the zoning ordinance on health and safety and fire hazard, is what has been recommended by the Code Review Committee. So the language would read that no responsible person of any property, and that is really the component that we were looking to change from the beginning. The current ordinance does not clearly identify who's responsible for maintaining the palm tree. This language cleans that up and provides for an enforceable ordinance. So no responsible person of any property shall allow any palm tree to have dead or dry palm fronds within 10 feet of the ground, structure, fence, wall, or any other combustible other than the tree from which the fronds have grown. That 10-foot separation is consistent with the zoning ordinance and is the recommendation from the Code Committee. I know we've had conversation about 10 feet separation, say from left to right, but from the ground, we want more separation, whether that's 15, 20, or 25 feet. Again, that delves into the aesthetics of palm trees more than the safety issues, and so Code Review opted to go with 10 feet all the way around, so to speak. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions, and we are seeking consensus on this item.
Questions?
Explain to me the difference in the language between no person shall allow and no reasonable person of any property shall allow. Why does that make a difference?
Mayor, members of the council, Councilmember Clark, I believe it had to do with who's ultimately responsible and accountable from a civil standpoint, because these are civil violations, in a court hearing or proceeding. The language that no person could mean the landlord, it could mean the tenant, it could mean other adults that live in the home that don't have any direct responsibility over or under a lease. And so this makes it very clear that the person responsible for the property, either by lease agreement or by ownership, has a responsibility to maintain the palm trees.
Might be a little thing. No responsible person of any property. How about for any property rather than of? Does that make a difference?
Mayor, Councilmember Clark, I'll look to Mr. Bowling. He is the expert on these smaller pieces or smaller nuances.
Thank you, Mayor, Councilmember Clark. Again, we'll refer that to the law department to see if that makes a difference on the actual code.
Any other questions? Any other questions? Go ahead.
I do have one question. Mr. St. John, would for example, a property manager be a responsible person?
Mayor, Councilmember Tommelchop, if they are the designated responsible person for the landscape, either by a lease agreement or some type of contract with the property owner, then yes, they could be the ones responsible.
Okay, so this would apply to any scenario where there's palm fronds that are not within this guideline.
Mayor, Councilmember Tommelchop, that is what we were trying to accomplish, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, seeing no questions, is there a consensus on this item? Looking for some heads. Melner.
I'm good.
Okay. Okay. Next.
Mayor, thank you. The next item we're talking about is required landscape maintenance. This really has to do with right-of-way. This information was obtained from our right-of-way services division, and again, has been reviewed by the Code Review Committee, and they are recommending these changes. The first change is in Section 1910, Section B, which currently says the city shall accept responsibility for the maintenance and operation. The Review Committee believes that that should be changed to the word may, because there will be times that the city should not accept the responsibility. And that goes to point number 1 under subsection B, which states that arterial and or secondary street right-of-way adjacent to single-family residential areas, excluding properties managed by a homeowners association that back onto the arterial or secondary street and have a screening wall constructed on the rear property line. So what we're saying is when plans come forward in the city for development, it needs to be clearly indicated in those plans who's responsible for common areas or certain aspects of the right-of-way. And the example that we use is 55th Avenue between Orangewood and Northern Avenue. So we know there's a community that sits to the east of 55th Avenue. They have a common area right-of-way that comes up to the curb or sidewalk of 55th Avenue, and there is a constructed block wall that creates some level of separation between that community and the actual secondary roadway, which is 55th Avenue. It is unclear who's responsible for the right-of-way, so that landscaped area between their block wall on their property and where our city begins at the curb line. And this has been under dispute for quite some time now, and these changes to the code help to bring some clarity, at least moving forward, on who's responsible for certain areas of the right-of-way. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have about this particular component.
Mayor,
Go ahead.
you said at least moving forward. So does that mean we're accepting the principle of grandfathering for issues such as 55th Avenue?
Mayor, Councilmember Clark, when it comes to changes in the zoning ordinance, there is a grandfather clause that we have to pay attention to. We can't create a situation where we have diminished the value of a property because of a decision made by the city. I've spoken at length with Mr. Bailey about these issues and these items. And so while what I'm not saying is we can't go back and do something different than we've done in the past or change a decision that's been made in the past. What I am saying is we need to be careful about doing that and making sure that we're not diminishing someone's property value in the decision that we're making. And so going backward, we'll have to look case by case and make a determination case by case with the planning administrator and the development services director, of course, in conjunction with Mr. Bailey's office about what's in the city's best interest.
I understand. So that means this new language is no solution to the issue you identified on 55th Avenue.
Mayor, Councilmember Clark, I believe it brings some clarity to the city's position in what we believe to be right. But to your point, without issuing a citation and taking it to court and having a judge make a determination, it doesn't bring absolute clarity.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Just along that same line, are these changes within the zoning code or are they within the nuisance code?
Mayor, Councilmember Melnar, this is the city code.
When you say the city code, because we've talked about the planning and zoning code. Is this within the planning and zoning ordinance that does grandfather versus a nuisance, which our attorney has provided statements that say nuisance codes don't necessarily follow a grandfathering law?
Mayor, Councilmember Melnar, this would be of the nuisance sort, not the zoning ordinance, where there has been case law for grandfathering.
Okay, thank you.
Is there consensus for these language changes?
Questions first?
I do have a question. So I'm trying to figure out if there's a way we could, I mean, if there's no agreement in place, isn't the property owner always responsible?
Mayor, Councilmember Tummelchoff, there's so many different scenarios throughout the city, it's hard for me to answer that question with one absolute. So in areas where there is no curb, gutter, or sidewalk and the right-of-way is an extension of somebody's property, you can make one argument. In other areas where there is curb, gutter, and sidewalk and some separation between the property line and this right-of-way, you could make a different argument. And then in other situations where the city has taken on the responsibility of maintaining right-of-way, maybe when we shouldn't have, then that creates more of that grandfather issue that although there isn't case law that exists today on the nuisance side, in conversation with Mr. Bailey, that it is something that someone could argue. even changes in the nuisance code that diminish property value, you could make an argument that's similar to what we've seen happen in the past in the zoning ordinance and changes that are made in the zoning ordinance.
Okay, I guess that answers my question. Thank you.
Consensus on this?
I thought I
Thank
already
you,
gave that.
Mayor. So
We're looking that way.
the last component of required landscape maintenance has to do with grass on the sidewalks. There was conversation, and I need to bring some clarity to this point. There was conversation in the Code Review Committee, and I got a little ahead of myself with this one. Had some conversation with Mr. Bailey, came up with some language, and Mr. Bowling, of course, came up with some language that we thought would work, added it to the presentation, and then realized that it hadn't been completely discussed and finalized with the Code Review Committee. But Councilmember Malnar has asked that I continue to bring it forward today. So again, focusing on health and safety, not necessarily on aesthetics, we would like to add language that says in subsection G of 2521, also, no person owning or occupying any property fronting on any street, alley, or public place shall allow grass or weeds to grow on sidewalk cracks, curb line openings, or other areas adjacent to the property that may create a tripping hazard. We believe that this is an enforceable code that allows for not only better aesthetics, but a safer environment for people that are either using a wheelchair or other walking device and using sidewalks to get around our city. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have on this.
Thank you, Mayor. Does this apply to parking lots?
Mayor.
If the property's on a, I mean, like, say, for example, I'm thinking in particular of a restaurant that's on a main arterial street, but the parking lot has cracks in it and there's weeds growing up through it, and I'm just wondering, it's private property, but the business itself is on an arterial street, so I'm just curious how that would work with this.
Mayor, Councilmember Tommelchoff, I believe, and I'll look to Mr. Bowling or Mr. Bailey for clarification, if the business has a parking lot that is part of public property, something that we control as a city, then we could enforce this code on that. If it is part of a private parking lot where the tenant has a lease agreement for that land use and the parking use, I don't believe we could use this ordinance to control that.
Okay, even if they're over 6 inches?
Mayor, Councilmember Tommelchoff, correct, even if it's over 6 inches, because what this does is deals with public space and a private person's responsibility to maintain or for some level of maintenance even on a public space.
Okay.
Mayor? But to clarify on that, the code still has the ability to cite a private property parking lot, I would think, if they have weeds growing up under other ordinances. Is that correct?
Mayor, Councilmember Malnar, that is correct, and that's what Mr. Bowling was just telling me. It's the first part of subsection G. And I apologize for the confusion.
I'd like you to clarify for me. So if a residential area has a sidewalk that's, maybe the sidewalk's 4 feet off of the street in the person's yard, but it's a city-owned sidewalk maintained by the city, then that residential citizen has to keep the sidewalks cleared, is what this is saying.
Mayor, that's correct. They have to keep it clear from anything that would create a tripping hazard.
Okay, so, and I guess I'm a little perplexed on this, but if the temperature makes a difference on the sidewalk and all of a sudden you have a bump in the sidewalk 2 inches and the city doesn't do anything about it, that's the city's responsibility, not the citizens.
Mayor, that is correct. This is regarding landscape maintenance.
I think that's walking a real fine line myself. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm wondering whether it might be then prudent to add parking lot to G, where it says fronting any street, alleyway, or public place in the city, including the area between the. If this is enforceable in parking lots, I'm wondering whether it should say specifically that parking lots apply here.
Mayor, Councilmember Tommelchaff, if there's consensus to add parking lots, I'm happy to do that.
It does say any property, though.
Yeah, I know, but, I mean, there's quite a few parking lots around that are really, they look like blight. So I just think the more specific we are, the easier it is to enforce, and that's just my opinion. I don't know, maybe you know whether it makes it easier to enforce or not.
Mayor, Councilmember Tommelchaff, I think it does bring some clarity to the ordinance, and as long as we're making the change, it's an easy change to include.
Yeah. This will be a radical departure for some. I think of some of the older neighborhoods that are 50 years old, where residents typically have never known that they were responsible for weeds in the sidewalk. All of a sudden being cited for weeds in the sidewalk. I think if we are going to move forward, we have got to do some kind of educational campaign and let people know that whatever had occurred previously does no longer hold, and if it is a safety issue and the weeds constitute a tripping hazard, then it's up to them to remove those weeds. Otherwise, we are going to have a bunch of angry people who are all of a sudden cited after living in their home for 20, 30, 40, 50 years. Thank you, Mayor.
Consensus on this?
And as well as the change that
With the
Councilmember
amendment.
Tommelchaff suggested.
With that amendment.
Thank you. And now moving on to holiday decorations, the Code Review Committee asked for Mr. Bowling and I to look at some language that other cities use to control some of the issues surrounding holiday light and the decorations surrounding holidays. This comes from one of our West Valley cities. We did make some minor changes to what the other West Valley city has in their code. The other West Valley city has a 60-day requirement. Enforcing on a 60-day requirement with no designated front or back end would mean that when we first observe the violation, the person would have 60 days before they're an actual violation, if that makes sense, because we need to be able to prove that the lights were up for longer than 60 days. And so the Code Review Committee decided on the language that says 30 days prior to and 30 days after the relevant holiday. And then, of course, there's language that suggests that the decorations need to be in good order, so they need to, or good condition rather, not torn, soiled, or faded, and displayed in a manner to not constitute a hazard to pedestrian or vehicle traffic. This would be new language to our code. We don't have any existing language for holiday decorations. It would be a new section. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, well, I have a question, but I actually wasn't prepared. I was just sitting here thinking, so if somebody put up American flag pennants for President's Day, I don't know what the next patriotic holiday is after that, if Veterans Day falls in there, is it possible that that same pennant could be up almost all year long and you just keep changing the name of the holiday that that pennant's up for?
Mayor, yes, that would be possible. There is a small time period, and I don't remember the exact math, but I think it's sometime in September that you would be able to have someone take something down. Actually, it wouldn't be in September because of Labor Day. Maybe it was August. There's a small time period in August where you would be able to force someone to take something down under this code. We don't get a lot of complaints about holiday decorations. The complaints that we do get are usually about Christmas lights, and we get a handful of them a year. And this code gives us some authority to ask someone to remove holiday or Christmas lights essentially from their house when it's not during Christmas season.
Okay.
Because it doesn't specifically say Christmas lights, what if somebody says these are my Valentine's Day lights, and these are my St. Patrick's Day lights, and these are my whatever other kind of lights they are. I mean, how do we, how do we manage that?
So Mayor, Councilmember Tomalchoff, we did have that discussion in code review. These are not complaints that we typically get.
Okay.
And our response from the people that we deal with in the public usually aren't, they don't go that direction. I don't anticipate getting a lot of non-compliance with this one.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, you looking for consensus?
Yes, sir.
Apparently you have that too.
Thank you.
Mayor, if I may, I'd just like to take a second as a member of the Code Review Committee to thank Mr. St. John and Mr. Bowling for their expertise and their input and their assistance on working through this with us. It's been really very helpful for us, and they've been very, very helpful. Thank you.
What else you have? Yeah? Barr, can you introduce item 3? Did 3. We just zoomed right along there, didn't we? City manager report.
Mayor, members of the council, I have 3 quick items to provide you in my report. First, as you know, yesterday was a little bit different for us here. We had a storm come through the area, and as you know, we had some microburst in the area, and there was damage done kind of throughout the city. Facilities has been working on repairing a number of different items that were identified. For example, the main library, 2 of our skylight ridges were lost, almost 50 feet of copper flashing, and it's resulted in some leakage in the atrium area. We've got some temporary fixes that are secure now, but we'll be doing some more permanent repairs. Our fire support building also got a chunk of roof torn off during the storm, and we had to move some sensitive equipment that could be damaged by this, and so that's been accomplished. And the roof is currently secure for now, but again, we'll be having to address this on a more permanent basis. Fleet Services had a leak in the fire bay, and it appears to be coming from a skylight. And as we're getting assessment done, there's likely other damage that we'll discover. We know that Glendale Airport, there were several planes that were damaged during the storm. If you drive by Murphy Park, you'll notice we have several trees that are down in Murphy Park. And again, we'll work to get those repaired as quickly as possible. Second news, I'm really excited to announce that that our Assistant City Manager, Vicky Rios, has been appointed by the International City Managers Association to be on a new select committee regarding it's the ACA's Leadership Institute on Race, Equity, and Inclusion. And we're real excited about this. This is one of within our strategic planning, we have a number of different goals in terms of inclusion, and we think this is going to be very valuable. So I want to congratulate her for this, and we'll keep you appeased as to the effort that she puts in, and hopefully some of the good things that we'll learn. We'll keep that reported back out to the council. The other bit of good news is that we did receive official notification from the U.S. Treasury Department that they reviewed our application and approved $7.7 million in additional emergency rental assistance funding. And so we'll be working now to get this delivered out. We'll need to have at least 65% of the funding expended by September, which we do not have any concerns on based on our past performance and needs here in the community. We're doing a final review of the eligibility requirements, and we'll develop a program guide to drive the work that's there. Finally, we're also working with the county and some of the other directly funded agencies to ensure kind of a consistent application of this program. But again, this is good news. It'll be additional money that we can put back into the community to help our citizens that are in most need. And Mr. Mayor, that concludes my report.
Thank you. City Attorney?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Mayor and Council, recently a council item of special interest for a couple of council members dealt with the redistricting, and just wanted to bring forward to you that the clerk's office with Ms. Bauer, Mr. Lee, and the Intergovernmental Relations Department and myself have been having regular meetings with regards to this, and we anticipate coming back to you in the next 2 to 4 weeks. Thank you.
Okay. Council item special interest. Next on the agenda is just that. Members have the opportunity to indicate topics that they'd like to have discussed by this council at a future workshop. Councilmember Eldama is not present. Councilmember Clark?
None today, thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Melner?
Nothing today, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Tomachoff?
Nothing today, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Turner?
Not today, Mayor.
Thank you. Vice Mayor?
Nothing, Mayor.
I have nothing. Can I get a motion to go into executive session?
So move.
Second.
Motion and a second to go into executive session. Discussion on the motion. Hearing none. All in favor, vote aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, vote nay. Here, guys, do have it. Motion carries. Council meeting's recessed.